Right. I think I'm live. Welcome back. I'm back.
And how humans fit in that, but I didn't realize or I didn't think about the question of home and how in some ways it can blow us out of the like it just blow up our parameters for what we consider to be, and even like what our place is, because that's what it is ultimately. It's like, what's our place?
Well, think about the irony. The Enlightenment which was Promethean and said, no, human beings are all what history is all about, and the telos. And now the Enlightenment has betrayed us because it might put us in the hands of non-humans in a powerful way. And the one thing that sort of tutored us about how to live with beings beyond us, religion, has been undermined by the Enlightenment history. So we're sort of like, right, maybe we aren't ultimate. And oh no, what do we have as a resource for dealing with that question? Well, stuff we've been taught for 4 centuries to not really believe in. And I'm not advocating a return to religion, because I think this is going to have an impact on religion like the printing press had on religion. Religions are not going to be untouched by this. They're going to be profoundly challenged, and I would argue even transformed by this. But nevertheless, this is in some sense, I hope I'm not misunderstood. I hope people will also wait before they jump on this till they see my video essay. But I think this is ultimately a religious question, these machines, in a really profound way. It's about what is our place in the cosmos, and is it the place we have believed it to be for several centuries, right?
I really appreciate you're talking about it as a wrestling and an attempt to discern these different dynamics, and it's going to befall on, in some degree, on Catherine. I think to we're going to have to together find some kind of a balance between the individual presentations that will be forthcoming from each of you, and then some conversations that will take place amongst yourselves. But Paul and I have already talked about how we definitely would like to make room for people in their own small groups and conversation groups to be able to wrestle with these questions on the ground themselves, amongst themselves, and to kind of see a pattern emerging that they can do that henceforth. In other words, that this is not a one-of kind of thing where we're going to go to Chino and we're going to try and solve all the world's problems, but rather that we not only have a sense of what are the issues, but we also have a sense of how can we process the issues along the way down the road. So that's going to be part of the goal, I think, for this conference. We have to make sure we leave enough time for that to take place.
I think we have to give that a priority. I mean, I think we have to. I mean, I would hope that one of the things that comes out of the conference is people have a guiding sense of what it is to exemplify being able to feel at home in the world in a way that is not fantasy or spiritual bypassing or all the other temptations that are going to arise for people right now. So yes, very much. Like, don't tell me what you believe, tell me what you practice. It's got to get into where people will see, realize for themselves in these groups, like what can they practice that will be like the best possible way of responding to this kairos. I have no doubt that we're now in a kairos. This is a kairos, just absolutely pivotal. One it could be. It's not crazy to say this could be the biggest turn in history. And so we are here now, and we have to try and help people as much as we responsibly and best can. You very much, John. I totally agree. I don't want this to just be talking about it. It's the time for just talking about these things is passing.
Catherine, you wave your hand if you want to get words in edgewise, and I will make sure I make space
I've got
for
a few
you.
words to sneak in. John, I really liked what you were saying about the need to complicate things first before we try to answer the questions. And so two things were coming to mind as you guys were talking. One was, so the image of sort of Odysseus and Abraham, these two versions of spiritual quests. Something that struck me is, now you guys can correct me, but it seems to me that those appear to be more masculine versions of this quest. But the feminine version of the quest is how do you maintain the home, which is a different type of quest, even though you still stay in the same spot, usually, although not always. If you,
I am not going to Chino, Eric, unfortunately. Family obligations keep me home. Wish I were, though. Sounds fun.
leave, it's usually the feminine role to reinstantiate the home, to rebuild the home. But often the story is there's a home to come back to, and usually it's some feminine element maintaining that state.
Well, in Odysseus, that's clearly the case. Penelope is, she is a wise trickster, holding off all these suitors and kind of actually making and unmaking the home, right? She's weaving and unweaving, and she's kind of leaving the home in a kind of flux in order to prevent a new seed, like a new identity of taking over. It's a pretty astounding imagery that's used in Ulysses.
Yeah,
That has kind of a unique role too in this same story.
I like how Catherine brings up the lack of women in these stories, and then Peugeot immediately jumps in with symbolism on what's her name? I'm already forgetting the home queen in Ithaca. Also, fun fact: Cornell is in Ithaca, New York, which is named after the hometown of Odysseus. So, fun connection. Also, Eric, if you can hop in here, feel free.
What did you say, John?
I said Sarah also has a rather unique story in
Yeah.
Abraham's homecoming. Perhaps not exactly as admirable as Penelope, but it's a story. Just
Well, Sarah and Rebecca are both under threat.
That's true.
Because, it's interesting that Abraham sojourns, he's got to go into Egypt. And so, in a sense, Abraham commits domicide when he says, oh, that's my sister, and I think there is a lot of domicide that happens out of fear of self-preservation. And, one of the things, as you guys were talking too, there's a lot of class element in this. I often reflect. So I have a cousin who is just a few months different than myself. His family was blue collar. My family was, my father's a preacher. We moved around. He stayed put. He's a welder, so he works with his hands. I'm a pastor. I work with my words and my mouth. And I look at the shape of our lives.
In your hands.
And my hands. He's lived in the same town his whole life. And that's a piece of this too that people. John Vervaeke, I really like that homesick idea, because it seems like 30, 40 years ago, people would brag, "Oh, I'm a citizen of the world," in a way saying, "I'm rootless. I get married on a pretty beach someplace. I dine with high status people over in this area," and there's almost a flagrant celebration of rootlessness. And
the handy thing about being a citizen of the world is that there is no world government that collects income taxes on you. A little bit of a cop-out, sort of just a tax haven identity, in my opinion.
So I don't know, Catherine, if you wanted to continue with your point.
Well, I actually want to jump off what you were saying, because that leads into my second point. When John was talking about the homesickness, the book that came to my mind was Andrew Sullivan's book, Far from the Tree. I don't know if you guys have read it. It's a fat one. But essentially, it's a number of interviews where he talks with people. He was a gay man. He grew up in a conservative home, felt very much like he was the fruit that fell far from the tree. And so it's a number of stories with people who are far from the tree. So he interviews criminals from families that aren't criminal, geniuses, people with particular disabilities, particular abilities, anything that exceptionalizes them and separated them from their home. But what made that come to mind was because I feel like that has become more the ideal now. So in the past, you had the homesickness, you missed home, you wanted to be there. But now it seems like most of modern culture, people are encouraged to define themselves in opposition to their home.
Yeah.
And so being far from the tree isn't experienced as a hardship, although it may actually existentially be experienced that way, but we don't culturally define it that way. We culturally define that as your true identity, which is understood in opposition. And I wonder how much that dynamic, if we could explore that and engage with that, might answer some of this domicide that we have, because I just see that as sort of the inverse of the book that you're reading, John.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think you said it better than I did. I'm very interested in that we got the loss of homesickness as a positive, and it's now become a negative, as you said. And we, in fact, we define maturity as people as leaving home in an important way. I think that was very well said. And of course, that's very problematic for the millennials. For many of them.
Howdy, Chad. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
I'm wait.
Pretty
I had
good.
I had a rear tire blowout on my way to go get a sandwich. So I'm waiting for AAA to come scoop me up. They should be here shortly, so I can go get
Good
some
old
new
AAA.
tires. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you lose control or anything?
No. It just blew out, and I was like, "What the hell, man?" And I looked at him like, "Geez, it's like really blown out." So, my wife, she's so brilliant. Who would have thought just get AAA? You know?
AAA is a good deal.
Oh, dude.
I highly recommend AAA. So for anyone out there listening, this is we are not sponsored or brought to you by AAA in any respect, but we thoroughly endorse AAA, because sometimes your tire blows out on the side of the road, and then you get to be on a live.
Yeah, and you don't have a spare, because for some reason my vehicle doesn't have a spare. But I mean, I've used it before in the past. It's great, dude. It's a great deal. Would that fall under the category of Blue Church luxuries?
Blue Church luxuries. I don't know. I feel like super blue church people don't even really drive that much. Being in a big city. I feel like AAA is most helpful for like semi-rural situations. if you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're still going to have to wait a heck of a long time. But if you're
Yeah.
like not quite in the middle of civilization where you could walk somewhere, but you're still close enough where there's some tow truck or towing company not too far away, it's pretty
Yeah.
handy.
They'll tow my vehicle 100 miles away
Yeah.
for no extra charge. I've been sitting here for 40 minutes, but that's fine. I've been making some videos for my channel and whatever, smoking cigarettes. What else would I be doing? So speaking of Blue Church, is this I had this weird idea about Peterson in his art event. Is that going to is that supposed to be like to kickstart a blue church reformation?
Or is it trying to make a red church?
Yeah,
Because
well, yeah.
that's from Jordan Hall, right? There's the blue church and the red religion.
Red religion, yeah.
And so Jordan Peterson doesn't really have religion. I think it's sort of like he's trying to make a red church.
Well, he's always been kind of from like if you look at his history, he's always kind of been blue churchy.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
and that's what I mean. Like, is he trying to, get it back in check and bring back, the good old days?
It's funny, those cars that blow by you sound like TIE fighters in Star Wars or something. But what was I saying? It's interesting. It's not like Jordan Peterson is just doing his best to get himself as a headline speaker for the next WEF forum conference, right? It's not like he's going to the conference and nailing some theses on the wall like climate change is over-exaggerated. ESG-based finance is a really bad idea, and you guys need to clean your act up.
Yeah.
Right? He's trying to create some parallel thing.
Well, he's doing a very blue churchy thing and doing it by committee.
Yeah, and an institution with a name. Yeah, it's very blue church format.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, odds are it has like one meeting that's kind of mediocre and it sort of fizzles out. I think is probably the most likely thing that'll happen.
Well, it'll make a really great episode for the Daily Wire.
Yeah, and that's also what they care about.
Well, yeah, it's a good conversation. Otherwise, as far as like the conversation that these guys had today, Vervaeke and Peugeot, Jonathan, Peugeot and Catherine and Von Donk. My wife, every time
Van
she hears,
Dunk.
yeah,
I think Peugeot called him Van Dunk, which I think is hilarious.
Every time my wife hears me mention John Van Donk, she calls him Donkey Boy for some reason. Which it's not really like her to do that, but I think she's actually making fun of me, participating in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
It's not at John's expense.
Yeah.
We don't want to hurt John's feelings. He's as sensitive as I am. Maybe not as sensitive, but yeah. So no, I thought it was good. I'm looking forward to the event. Are you going to the event?
Unfortunately, I cannot. Family duties and obligations will keep me here.
Listen, those things, family, it's not really that important. I mean, we've already talked about family values being not that, it's kind of a trite phrase. You don't really need them, Sam. You really need us.
I see. So in my quest for a spiritual home, I should leave my actual home and my actual family and try and find a different one.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's right. So think about that. Reconsider maybe. And yeah. Anyways.
Are you
really
going
good.
to Chino?
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to be there for the conference and the Anna Chino 23 event.
Yeah. Are you camping with Grizz?
Yes. Yep.
It'd be fun. I'm jealous.
Yeah, it should be. It'll be good. A good pilgrimage of sorts. I guess maybe.
Yeah, retreat.
Yeah, I love retreats.
I've never met Vervaeke. I think it would be fun to meet him in person. I've met Peugeot, but that was before I had a channel or anything. He did an event in Chicago back kind of
Yeah.
before he was really that big. And I met him at that. He's shorter than you would expect.
Yeah.
Vanderklay is taller than you'd expect. Peugeot is shorter than you expect. I have no idea about Vervaeke's height.
Well, it's what's really weird is so PBK will mention that his height is pretty, very strange, and compared to watching him on the screen versus when you meet him, which is sure. But then, like the same thing happened with Lance. Like I met Lance.
Yeah, I met Lance.
And
I've met Lance twice, I guess.
Well, even you guys are both like. Well, Lance is really gargantuan. I mean,
Yeah, Lance is like 6'4" or something. I'm 6'2", 6'3" if you stretch me out.
Right. But even knowing that, it's really it's striking to meet people. It's very weird, actually. I'm not sure I'm fully comfortable with it. Not because I feel like you guys are weird or going to do anything weird. I feel akin to many of you, even you, even though we've only had dinner once and stuff. But there's something there's a particular relationship that we share, and then like when we meet, something about that gets kind of shattered, and it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
So
it is funny. Like after I met Paul and interacted with him in person for a while, every time I've watched his videos since, he seems different. Right. I have that sort of in-person context for him, and I notice his mannerisms just hit and land a little differently because I now have the in-person information connected to.
Yeah, it's like I like my internet friends to be internet friends because that's normal.
Yeah.
Well, it keeps this relationship what this is, and then like you add that other element in there, it's like I don't know. I don't really what to say about it. It's not terrible. It's delightful to meet you guys. It's just something transforms, and it's just really weird.
Yeah. Well, you should come down to our Chicago meetup sometime.
I would like to. The thing is it meets on Tuesday nights, which are date nights, and now now I'm doing this Lions Club thing, and that's supposed to meet.
Good.
Yeah, that's supposed to meet once a month on a Tuesday, and so I'm already cutting in. So I have to be even more intentional with the dates that we have because that's very important. If any of you are in serious relationships or married, be intentional. My sponsor says, put it on the calendar, show her, be intentional because it's important. So
my wife and I went out on a date last night, thanks to my mom, Grandma, for babysitting.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, we did too. We went to a murder mystery at the movie theater.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, so it was really strange. It was like, I don't know, some local businesses wrote the script and put it together, and it was fine. It was a good, cool thing. Well, hey, I appreciate you, Sam. Good to see you, Andrew. I got this guy coming. My battery's dying.
Good luck with your tire.
Thank you,
Chad.
Go check out my latest stuff over on the Friday Morning Nameless. I think there's some good stuff over there for y'all.
How's it been, Sam?
Oh, it's been good. I was just sort of thinking about my own relationship with Blue Church, Red Religion. Because I come from a very Blue Church family, but yet I grew up in a Red Religion. And I feel like I'm pretty comfortable in both of those places. At the extent of feeling a little bit like an outsider in both of them, but able to translate and understand between them.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about being an autodidact, right?
Mhm.
A bunch of people like say some theology stuff, and you're always like translating it in your head, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So this past week, my dad and I hosted a Passover Seder, or not a Passover Seder, I should be clear. It was a Passover home church service. And we served communion, not just a Passover Seder. And it was specifically not an old covenant thing, but a new covenant thing. And we invited some people, and we had something like 25 people show up in my dad's house. And I suppose we were something like the officiants, and we sang songs, served communion, and had like a little teaching, I guess. And it was pretty fun. And like I said, somewhere around like 25-ish people were there. And then on Good Friday, I went to my grandparents' old church for a Good Friday service because, well, I'm kind of in between. I'm a little bit church homeless at the moment, and my grandparents went to a UCC, a United Church of Christ church, which is like super mainline blue church.
Yep.
And the service was lovely. The service was beautiful, but I think it had 20 people in it on Good Friday. So my dad and I hosted a Passover service that was larger than the local United Church of Christ's Good Friday service. Even though they have a big fancy building, stained glass windows, a huge organ, like there was like a pastor, an assistant pastor, and a music person, you know, all fully employed by the church leading the thing. And so it's a weird mix of that. I feel like that's an example in just 2 days apart, my red religion background and my blue church background colliding a little bit. And it's weird, the strengths and weaknesses of either side. So yeah, I don't know if I self-ordained myself or anything like that to be eligible for that. I come from a background like I said, my red church or my red religion background is like, you don't need to be ordained to host a home fellowship. Just like do it, and if you're in charge, do a good job. You know, you don't need to have gone to seminary. You don't need to be officially anything. And that you're just the church meeting, and if you gather in Jesus's name, he's there with you. So, hey, Lance, the man of tall proportions. We were just talking about you.
Were you really?
Yeah, Chad was on here earlier, and we were talking about how you're taller than you seem on the internet.
Can you hear me just fine?
Yeah.
I can hear you just fine. Yeah.
All right. Trying to get the switch to my AirPods. There we go.
Lance and I had a in real life hangout about like a month ago.
Wonderful.
Was that?
Yeah.
It was a good unrecorded randos conversation, lost to the sands of time and Lance and Mai's memory.
It will. No, it'll last. It'll last for us, Sam. But sometimes they're good to have off. No, I've turned my phone off. I was just checking in. I took off the week, and it's Orthodox Holy Week this week, so I've been attending a bunch of services. And I fired my computer up, and there was a notification that Sam was having a chat, so I wanted to come in and hop in.
Yep.
Yeah. So Hezi asks, would you truly consider that, Sam, doing your own thing? And that was one of the topics that Lance and I talked about in our unrecorded conversation was because, Lance, you have a little bit of a background with home churches. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's about 2008 when I left a small Willow Creek Megish church, and the pastor had already been doing this seminary program, but he left because he saw that they weren't really producing disciples. Right. So we had all these programs, lots of money, great people. But when he actually looked at like the church budget to actual true like people that got transformed, it was like $1 million a disciple. He was like, this doesn't work. also, he was going around in the mid 2000s talking about how the church in America was going to be collapsing because you saw it in the West, or you saw it in Europe, and it was coming. So, kind of prophetic with all that. So, anyway, we went out and did an Acts 2:42 house church planning model. So while we were going through the ministry apprenticeship program and doing our seminary, we were all planning house churches and kind of came together. So I spent from like 2009 through 2019-ish or whenever when I started going to Orthodox church, 100% in the house church world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so how do you find people that are interested in your house church together with you?
Friends, family, it's just like, it's if you would think about that, and you really don't need, I mean, if you're really doing a house church, like if you had 4 or 5 families with kids, that's enough. I mean, truly, if you think about kind of coming together or so on and so forth. And, it was just very organic. Evangelicals, we love to invite people to church, right?
Right.
And in fact, before my wife passed away, the first 5 years of me doing a house church was people in recovery. So, obviously you have a 12-step model where higher power works, and it's great. You don't mention it, but there are other people that want to learn more, that want to follow, Jesus. So it was a lot of families with in recovery.
Well, that gives it a specific identity and mission too.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, was it, one of the things I would say, here are some wisdom steps that I have with respect to that. One, I wouldn't lead it by yourself. Go out in twos. I think there's that Jesus principle. Like I found, like when we saw, so watching people who had success, that were two families that really came together around it, right? That would kind of shoulder the burden of really being there and leading it. And so, for example, if someone gets sick or, something were to happen, that other couple could, or individual could stand up and kind of help kind of carry the load a little bit that way. It's also nice to share houses. Like, so if you're going back and forth, it just lessens the burden a little bit, but I think that's a wisdom step. And the other thing we did, which I felt was really beneficial, was we also connected ourselves with other house churches. So now we had multiple groups that would come together, and we used to say that house church was the cake, and our coming together, we would meet together on Sundays. That was the icing. So like if you were going to choose one or the other, go to house church first, because in community, the smaller group, like that's really where we thought like the most important things were happening. But it was good to then kind of come together to give it a little more, let's just say, mass, and then also just variety, flavor. And so, but I would say it's not easy, families come and go. And I would tell you, a lot of people don't want to live life that closely with one another. Like because the fact of the matter is human things happen. So like, if you happen to get in an argument with your wife on the way to church, shocking, that happens, people. But like if you get in an argument with your wife on the way to church, if you're in a mega, you can kind of just, be a little disgruntled, hang out, and you can scoot in and out. When you walk into a house church, it's like, how are you doing? Fine. We're like, oh no, you guys aren't fine. So it's like it's really kind of out there. But there are a lot of great rewards to that too. Like kids are always invited into everything. So when you would, we actually did communion every week. We would do some sort of, biblical kind of focus sort of a thing. Spent a lot of time in prayer and stuff like that. And the kids were always right there with us. They just sit with us and whatever. There might be a little squawking, no problem. So there are a lot of really cool things about it. Mm-hmm. So you asked me a question and I went on and on and on and on. Sorry, Sam.
No, that's good. And so did you have like resources that you got from some sort of home church network thing or some, I don't know, website or para home church organization or something like that?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff out there. David Platt had some stuff. Like Francis Chan nowadays has some stuff. You had the Acts 29. Like you. There's a lot of things you can do. I was very blessed in that. Like I told you, our founder, who I say was our Paul Vanderklake, very similar guys. Like funny, tall guys, vociferous readers, in on pop culture. So when we had gone out, he had a lot of materials, and so when we came together in seminary, we were building out a lot of the programs. So we made sure we had a devotional guide. It was expository stuff. So we would go into a book of the Bible, and then everyone at the house church was following along each week with these, devotionals or whatever. And we had discipleship guides and stuff like that. I would say that stuff's actually pretty easy. And in a Protestant sense, I would say find what you like, right? Find what you like. There's lots of good things that are out there. But you do need to give your folks, and if you want some, Sam, I got a bunch of stuff out there on my hard drive. But if you do need to give people, I think, the framework or the scaffolding, whether it be, hey, this is what we're going to be focused on this week. It could be even as much as if they have their own Bibles to say, here's what we're going to read on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or you could cut and paste them and print things out. But I would say the most important thing that really happens is, like, we always shared a meal with one another. Like, it's just being consistent and intentional and living life with one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it does seem like you need something of a specific mission or identity that is an answer to the question of why aren't I just going to the church with a building? And that's interesting that it sounds like part of that for your home church experience was the emphasis on being connected to recovery.
Yeah, that was a piece, but it was a little different because the families are in that recovery spot too. I'll tell you what it really did was people were very, very honest in our house church, right? And my sons were 6 and 8 or 7 and 9 when that started. And of course we didn't, the language is clear, but we really shared like honest struggles. I wanted them to hear that stuff. Like, they're going to be adults. They're going to go through that stuff. And so we would like very honestly talk about our struggles or things like that, which then like modeled to, let's say, our spouses that maybe weren't a part of that. It'd be, oh, wow, we're getting real here. And so then, as we would share and discuss maybe what things were going on or so on and so forth, and our kids would actually hear us talk about real stuff. So I thought that was really good. I think the mission is Christ, Sam. And I think the mission is getting closer to Christ. And I think the mission is like, so we build ours around Acts 2:42, right? Now, I have a different view on what that means now that I see the prayers and the breaking of bread. Like in a Protestant sense, we're like, oh, that's just having a meal, right? But right? So we modeled on, hey, we're going to come around and we're going to be like an Acts 2 church. And we're going to be focused on the apostles' teachings, right? We're going to be focused on the breaking of bread, prayers, and, so on and so forth. And so I think that has to be the focus. And then like one of the focuses can be like, you've got younger kids, Sam. It's like, hey, our focus is wanting to come around other families, right? And model what the Christian life looks like for our families. I do think one of the things that Acts 2 is, in that paragraph, it talks about one of the things that made them really stood out was their extraordinary giving, right? And so one of the cool things about being a house church is, and particularly if the house church pastor is not trying to be funded by the people, you then have all this money that comes in that you can really be missional with that, like truly helping the poor and the needy. And so, another thing that could be is, and so maybe that comes together as you come together, is really be out on mission together with people, like truly be serving the poor and the needy. And then you have some real money behind yourselves to really like actually go out and put that tithe towards helping those in need. So there's some really cool, because you aren't spending money on rent or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Hezi asked, also, I think that if Sam did his own thing, he would need to be explicit in where he stands, since he may have people join and find out midway that you're not aligned theologically. And I am in no way promising to start a house church. I could maybe see it happening, but I could see a lot of reasons why that probably won't happen too. But I think that if I were to do it, it would be, I think it would make the most sense to make it be very explicitly Unitarian. And that is sort of its reason for existence, so to speak. And the answer to the question of why don't I just go to the church with a building on the corner? And that would be who it was intentionally trying to reach out to, and church would be that crowd. And that would be a theological distinctive that would give it a coherence to its identity and a purpose for its existence. Because like I mentioned, that we did that Passover service last week, and we had people that were all kinds of Protestants and a few Catholics, right? Super ecumenical, mostly just friends and stuff who know us. And, a fair amount of them would know where we stood theologically, but maybe not everyone. And there was some Unitarians there too, but it was just completely ecumenical, but it didn't have anything about that as particular to what was going on about it. But if we were to be fronting that part of the identity, that would turn some of those people off.
Right. Well, so you mind me asking you a few questions? Because I thought about our conversation on the drive home. So Unitarianism, this is a hill you're willing to die on, correct?
Sure.
No, do you?
Yes.
Is it? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. That's
right,
different than saying I'm 100% sure.
Absolutely.
But
right,
if you say, Sam, recite the Nicene Creed, or I'm going to kill you, I will at the end of the day hopefully let you kill me.
Well, because then I say this because you have kids, right? So I talked about kids and family, what we're trying to do this. And so is this something that you think is imperative that your kids understand that a Unitarian theology is what they need to have?
Yes.
Okay. So you've answered those two questions, and I thought that's where you'd be there. But I wanted to ask those. So that sounds important to you. And that's why I do think it's important. Then you do need to like provide a place for that. Because here's the thing that we were preparing even in a Trinitarian world, Sam, which is, our Paul, his name is Craig McIlvaine, said, we need to be prepared to be the underground church guys. If you guys think it's just going to be okay, like we've lived in this weird time where everything's okay, if times are coming where we may not be able to be as open as we wanted to do. And so you need to be able to prepare yourself and your kids to do this. And I think the reason why I ask those questions, Sam, is you already have realized you can't live in the Trinitarian church world right now. Too many excommunications, it uproots your family. I mean, that's a fact. So now you're exposing your kids to Christianity shrinking. It's already going to be persecuted. And then doubly, they're going to have to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, right?
Right.
And are going to, so you're almost going to have to model, hey guys, we're Unitarians. We're a small sect of a shrinking sect.
Right.
I'm going to teach
the world's
you.
coming to hate Christianity, and the Christians already hate us even then. Yeah.
Right. So I think one of the things, as I thought a lot about this, if I were in I'm just talking out loud, based on our conversation, would be, is like, man, if I'm Sam, and if I'm really there, because I understand what that means to drop your net like this, I'm an all-in guy, right? I'm like, he needs to equip his kids to be able to do church outside of church.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. And which is harder than the situation I had as a kid, because I actually did have a church. We did meet in homes sometimes, but most of the time we actually did have a building. And we did meet on Sunday, and we at least had that sense of stability and home about that. It just sort of slowly dissolved. And honestly, part of this, if I were to do something like this, would be picking up some of the pieces. Like some of the people who were at the Passover service were people that had been in part of my church growing up. And there are a fair amount of them that are in a similarly homeless situation that might be up for something.
Well, and Sam, there's got to be more people like you, right? Like as much as like Paul starts gathering a little group of people around him, I mean, there's got to be Unitarians that have also experienced, but you can't be the only guy that's experiencing this.
No,
right?
No, it's not. And there are YouTube channels and Facebook groups of people who have this shared experience. And that This is a funny comment. I like this Sam guy. Appreciate it, Matt. But this whole stream premise of nicing Christians helping Sam make a Unitarian underground church is bizarre. Well, welcome to this corner of the internet. I don't know what to tell you.
Hey, because I love Sam.
And another option, so there is a church that is like 50-ish minutes away that is related to the church that I went to. And I think that I'll be going there again this Sunday for my second time, and starting to have ties there and seeing if I can make that work. And then maybe doing like a home fellowship thing for the people that are in my neighborhood once a month or something like that. And it's not like a home church identity, but it is something of a religious camaraderie group. Hey, Paul. And that would be, and then sort of seeing where it goes from there.
Yeah, I think I spent a long time in this world. We had, we did things that worked well. We did things that didn't work well and stuff like that, because one of the things, like I said, we met midweek. Also, Jess P's a great resource on this too, because they started as neighborhood house church stuff, and then they ended up a dying church gave them a building. By the way, and I went to seminary with 12 guys, and 3 of them were basically given buildings from dying churches. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can get it if you are a group that, the problem is those become albatrosses because, as Paul's on here, parking lots and air conditioning and roofs and all. I mean, this stuff it becomes such a burden for a small community to try and have to fund it, particularly without any vocational.
A building is a gift, but it's also kind of a curse if you have the wrong one. And a lot of the super old churches, HVAC is like the biggest chain around the neck of a lot of old churches.
But one of the things, since you're close enough, because 50 minutes is just far enough away that you can certainly do it. Like I would say,
it's a pain in the butt with 3 little kids. But you put them in the minivan, you put some Veggie Tales on, and you make it work.
Yeah, I mean, compared to Christians in history, comparing what they had to do to get to some churches in the rural areas is probably. But let's be realistic. Like, so when we did our house churches, and I think the Justice Group still does this, we meet some day other than Sunday, right? And it was church. It was in the context that we described it. I mean, you could start doing that with some Unitarians, and then you guys always have that place to go to connect to on Sundays. That's a little bit farther. You see what I'm saying? Like you can,
and maybe even that church that's 50 minutes away is something like a home church, and we're almost like a church plant or a church plant feeler or something like that.
I would keep it independent of them. You certainly don't want to get sucked into their, because.
Well, part of it is that they're also part of an emerging church network that there's, one in New York, one in Kentucky, and one in Rhode Island or something like that. That's basically the pieces of the Way International that are healthy and coming back together again. And so it does seem to have a little bit of vibrancy to it. And the internet is helping because it's attracting the people like me. So there are some pieces. I'm not as alone as it sometimes seems.
Right. I would just say I would just have a loose affiliation, abstinently date until there became such time. Like it would be really obvious if you would want to like formally connect, because I mean, we've all been through it. If you're out in evangelical world, I mean, people break up all the time.
Yeah.
And
our Unitarian vessel is called, I think he meant onesies. That's hilarious.
So anyway, I'm talking too much about this. I'm sorry, Jonathan.
No, that's okay. I mean, we could always talk about my personal life, but I've been thinking about AI a lot recently too. That's a subject that keeps coming up.
What do you think about AI, Sam?
I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm not sure what they all are. I studied biostatistics, and I was part of a machine learning laboratory at Harvard and MIT and grad school that was trying to it was called machine learning back then, improve the use cases for machine learning in healthcare. So I do technically have some AI bona fides. I do kind of know how this stuff works, and that has been kind of a part of my professional career. And I, may or may not work for large tech company X at the moment. But I think that is SAM an advanced GPT? I sure hope not. I feel like some of the things that I think about for AI is that intellect in and of itself does not have a purpose, and that a chat GPT, it's entirely unclear what its purpose is, right? It doesn't even actually have a business model at the moment, other than like you can subscribe to get the slightly faster version, right? Because no one really knows what it is. And I think that it will not really, it's not useful unless it's put to an actual task. And that a lot of the fears of it becoming sentient or it trying to take over the world or something like that, I think at this stage in history are just completely ridiculous. Maybe at some point, because it has no actual desires. Like when Sam Harris is really bad at understanding why he does what he does. Sam Harris thinks that he mostly does what he does because it's rational. And when someone says, hey, Sam, a lot of these things sure look like values and you can't derive your values from your facts. There's the is-ought distinction. And then Sam Harris will normally do some version of, clearly suffering is bad. And then there's an opposite of suffering that's obviously good. And if you don't agree with that, then I don't know what sort of thing you even are. And so let's get back to talking about rationality again. And he's basically just saying, I take all of my desires and all of my motivations and all of my regulatory circuitry just for granted. And I'm just going to accept it for what it is. And then I'm going to use rationality given all of those things. But I'm going to assume that those things actually don't actually make any difference. And I think that for a lot of people, that lack of awareness of why we do what we do, and that we assume that we mostly just do what we do for the reasons of intelligence or rationality or whatever you want, or intellect, whatever word you want to call that. I think that that's why they assume that AI would want to take over the world. Well, no, the reason why you think AI would want to take over the world is you're the product of millions of years of evolution of people who have tried to take over the world, and you have that inherently built into you, and you are also built into you that you are suspicious that other people are going to try and do the same thing that you want to do, and you're just projecting that onto this large language model that has no such feelings or desires or anything along those lines. But that's not to say that I don't think that these things are dangerous. I think that people entirely misunderstand what these things are and the dangers that they will actually present. So an AI model needs a couple things in order to work. It obviously needs a large amount of data that is representative of the past in a way that's hopefully representative of the future. The Trinitarians are trying to take over the world, Paul, but you already mostly succeeded. But if anything, it's maybe slightly losing grip. But in any case, back to our original subject, or whatever, the new subject, I think that so AI needs a couple things to work. It needs data that is, it needs data that's representative of the thing that it's being programmed to do. It needs a success and failure function. And the success and failure function needs to be a single number. It can't even be a collaboration of multiple forms of success and failure, the same way that we seem to be able to integrate multiple values and competing success and failure functions. And AI needs a single one. And it can be either 0, 1, in other words, good, bad, or it can be a scale of like 100 brownie points, 10 brownie points, negative 10 brownie points, and you want to make the number bigger. It can either be a continuous scale or a binary scale, but it needs to all condense into one number. And this number is often given to it. And this is sort of like what you could think of as an artificial intelligence's sensory system, right? It has senses that get to its algorithm, but it needs a success or a failure. Right, like one AI system that I worked on was trying to give migraine patients the best medication for them, and there were 3 common migraine drugs, A, B, and C, that had all been approved to treat migraine, but no one knew which one worked better, or if some of them worked better for certain kinds of patients and some of them worked better for other kinds of patients. So hey, let's make a model that can take some patient information like your symptoms, your age, your history, your medication history, the sorts of things that would seemingly be most relevant. And again, it's often a human deciding what those sorts of things that are most relevant are. Mm-hmm. And then you make, all right, here's a bunch of patients that we've seen in the past. Here's their characteristics. Here's what drug we gave them. And then what we would do in this trial is we would call the patient 6 months later and ask them a series of questions about their medication and their headaches. And then that would turn into a 0 or a 1. This medication worked for this patient, success, 1. This medication did not work for this patient, 0, right? And then, so it's trying and then an AI algorithm also needs an algorithm. There are lots of different kinds of algorithms. There's various families of neural networks, recurring neural networks, and there's a bunch of different things, but basically, you don't need to get into the details of that very much. It's sort of like asking a car, there's V8 engines, there's V6 engines, there's turbocharged straight 4 engines, but at the end of the day, they all take air and gasoline and spin something, right? And there's a bunch of different ways that you can combine air and gasoline and spin something. And V6 engines have some advantages over V8 engines and vice versa. But anyway, there's a bunch of different algorithms that take data and computing power and then optimize their system to try and maximize the ones and minimize the zeros, or maximize the continuous scale and minimize the bad. That's all that they do, really. They have a handful of parameters, although these big language models have like millions of parameters in them. So they're trying to figure out the right combination of all these million parameters to optimize ones and minimize zeros. So what are these chat models that we're interacting with optimized for? It's almost as if they're optimized to play Wheel of Fortune, is really sort of what they do. They look at basically all the text on the internet, and then they're trained on that. And so when they're given a prompt, all they try and do is predict what text comes next. It's in the same sort of way that someone playing Wheel of Fortune is given a couple clues, or it's like a crossword puzzle. It's a very similar sort of game as that. And if it's able to predict the text that comes next well, then 1. If it doesn't, then 0. Right? So that's all that these language models are, is that they're optimized to, predict what text comes after the text I've already seen, based off of the text that I have that's in my training repository, which is oftentimes like Wikipedia and a bunch of things of that nature.
So does that mean that it's not going to ever really give you net new information unless by accident?
Right. Kind of. There's no inherent creativity.
Right, not inherent, but it's predictive creativity, which means that if it's only doing so by kind of synthesizing the entire corpus of the internet or whatever, and basically being the best synthesizer of all that information and saying, here's an output. So it's like...
It's entirely dependent on what people have already written.
Right, but it's a step change from like search, which is a more like,
trying to find the link that you'll click on based off of the input that you gave it.
Right, and more like explicit pattern matching as opposed to predictive generation. So, I mean, I think, for what it's worth, it's a powerful tool, probably dangerous, could be weaponized. but I think it does need a telos that will come from a human. It'll have to be, it could be programmed, it could be derived, but it's not going to take over the world, I don't think, without nefarious people agency behind it.
It has no inherent desire, obviously, but to the extent that we could anthropomorphize it to say what its desires are, its desire is to give the text that will most likely follow from what it's seen. That's its really only quote unquote desire. And it's almost like a kid who's cheating on his homework, right? You give it a test and it's like, oh, what did that kid put on this question? Except it has the ability to cheat on, billions and trillions of lines of text. And the reason why it can pass the bar exam is I'm sure there's huge amounts of the internet that are devoted to studying for the bar exam.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's just doing that. It's just
Sam,
okay, I get asked a bar exam question, and the data that it has in its background that's the most relevant is the huge part of the internet devoted to studying for the bar exam. So then it's relatively good at finding the text that would best match the answer. That's all it's really doing.
Yeah, I like the one meme, which is to learn to code, and actually as if that's the one thing that actually they think that AI is going to be able to do really well. So coders are going to be out of work. But so here's a question this is a dumb guy question, right? I'm not worried about being sentient. It's not going to take on those levels. It's just not, right? It's going to learn and do great things. But, Wozniak and Musk, and then you've even seen this ChatGPT CEO, they seem to be thinking that right now we're hitting an inflection point, like it's getting good enough that they said, hey, let's do this 6-month pause. Because what they're really calling for is, hey, guys, we're getting ready to do some things here. They're going to have a massive global impact. And so we should have honest conversations, transparency. We shouldn't have this stuff black boxed because garbage in, garbage out, it absolutely can be used. And let's face it, power and money are the people that are going to make a lot of money off this, and that gives you power. Also, we know people are easily manipulatable, and that's easy to kind of start doing to figure out what are the things that manipulate people better, because it's like, are they pushing Go
ahead, Lance.
What do you think? So my question would be, could you understand this better? Do you think we're getting close to this inflection point where, by the way, there's no way we can have this discussion on a global basis because we can't talk, right? But do you think we're kind of there where we should be talking about some transparency and trying to think about what we're actually doing here?
Yeah. So here are some specific examples of things that I would really worry about for AI. I think that some of the most dangerous things that AI could do would be things like this. And also I should caveat that the AI won't do this by itself. There will be a human or a team of humans or a company behind these things that are profiting. And again, the value judgments and the design and the highest level of thinking is still being done by a human or a team of humans somewhere that are then applying AI to something like this. But here's something that I could imagine, and I would be shocked if some form of this didn't already exist. But like an AI porn generator thing that all it did was, make 10 or 100 porn AI generated things, post them on, Pornhub or whatever, see which ones get the most clicks and the most watches, retrain itself based off of that, do the same thing again tomorrow, and then learn from that, do the same thing again tomorrow, and it can be getting huge amounts of iterative feedback quickly. And that's another thing that these AIs really need to be really good is iterative, quick, helpful feedback that is very quantifiable. And it needs to be training itself on some objective function that it can get very clear 0, 1 or scale 0 to 100 or whatever feedback from. And how many clicks did this porn video get would be a very easy one that there is a quantity that you're trying to maximize and optimizing and retraining yourself on. And then all of a sudden we've got like weird AI super porn that is, making some people some real money. and that it is, like porn itself is already some plague upon humanity, but this would be turning it up a whole new notch. Right.
Well, and let's face it, they call it Trump porn. But the right has their porn. Like that terminology is
Right.
real. Like, what are those things that trip those things to? Because what I worry about is, it's Grimm. One of Grimm's big things. Remember, embody. We want what's best for you. We're going to trust these corporations and all these people to actually be doing what's in the best interest of humanity. Like, call me a skeptic, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And then you could imagine, like, okay, so porn is one thing, and that has its obvious. There's the obvious reason why that would be first on the list is because it's probably the easiest, fastest way to make money. But shortly behind it is like, okay, make really, really addictive kids cartoons. And just put them on YouTube, and then just have an AI YouTube channel or many AI YouTube channels that are doing the same thing. Make videos using AI generative powers, see which ones get the most clicks, retrain your algorithm accordingly, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And that could get, shockingly good. And if you think kids are addicted to their phones now, just wait until you've unleashed something like that on them. And that could be, even worse. And then other things that you can imagine following shortly behind that would be like, I don't know, gambling of some kind. Basically, some sort of AI slot machine that was just designing a super addictive game that was either literally in casinos or was some sort of like Candy Crush thing where it gets you to do in-app purchases.
Yeah, in-app purchases, right? You got to have the right. If you've had kids or they're into games or whatever, they got to have the skins and this stuff. And I'm like, no, I'm not. You can earn it. I'm not giving you any money to buy that stuff.
Yeah.
AI designed video games that are just to maximize maximize revenue through engagement. But basically, all these things that I'm thinking of are just ways of super grabbing attention for the purposes of making money for their owners through the scale of the internet.
Yeah. The AI
and
won't
that's
be,
different than taking over the world, but it's still kind of scary and evil.
Well, the AI won't be the paperclip maximizer. It'll turn us into the paperclip maximizers, and that's the danger.
And so I have some thoughts on the paperclip maximizing thing. This is where I think people get a little bit wrong. Okay, so the paperclip maximizing idea is like, okay, you design a machine that's sole goal is to maximize the production of paperclips, and it gets so good and smart that it basically converts the entire world or the universe into paperclip manufacturing. But here's the thing, it would also have to compete in a world where everyone else was trying to maximize their own whatevers. And making paperclips isn't inherently that profitable. Someone's making a little bit of profit because paperclips are still in use. But basically, the paperclip, AI paperclip ink would have to compete with AI lollipop ink. And you can probably make more money selling lollipops than paperclips. But then all of a sudden you realize it's just a version of our pre-existing economy that is all of these companies competing to figure out making what exactly is the most profitable, and it won't be paperclips. Right.
Sam, pull up the Chris Show quote, because it goes right to what you were talking about there. 337. There you go.
I feel like everything Sam described already exists. You vote for the best porn, most addictive kid shows, and most addictive gambling game each time you click. Exactly. So what I'm saying is that a lot of what AI will do that's dangerous will be just taking some of our worst vices and exploiting them even further than has already been able. Right?
Yeah, I think that's what Paul said. AI just speeds up that process.
Yeah.
I think the paperclip maximizing analogy is really just to demonstrate that you have to be careful about the emergent behaviors of a system like AI, and that it doesn't have any intrinsic safety parameters around like its program telos, right? Like, so you could end up with this crazy absurd outcome if it's not handled with care. But I mean, I think the economic thing is also, I think those are some of the limiting factors for like what would prevent some of those emergent behaviors from going haywire. Not to mention you could just pull the plug on the computers.
Mm-hmm. And here, something that I think about, this will be hard for me to express. Applying AI to healthcare so far has mostly been pretty unsuccessful. There are a handful of use cases of things that have been helpful, like say AI image recognition, trying to better improve the diagnosis of breast cancer on mammograms or something like that, where you give an AI a whole bunch of mammograms and say, this one had breast cancer, this one didn't. And you train it to be good at recognizing which mammograms have breast cancer and which ones don't. But even then, it's just learning to mimic doctors, because it still needs a trained data set that says this one has breast cancer and this one doesn't. So really, it's actually just training to recognize breast cancer diagnosis. Like during the pandemic, I was training an AI that was and we're trying to predict whether or not they have COVID based off of their triage vitals, right? So you get their height, their weight, their temperature, obviously being extremely relevant, and a couple maybe of their labs, you know, the stuff that you can take really quickly. And then you need to predict, does this patient have COVID or not? And then at some point it's like, well, wait a minute, why not just give them a COVID test? Right.
Yeah.
At some level. And then, but even
at
then,
some point, the wheel's still the best invention.
Right. But okay, so the COVID test might take half an hour. And, but even then, actually what we were predicting was not, does this patient have COVID, but what's the result of the COVID test? And the COVID test, because you need a source of truth. And at some level, the source of truth is a test. It's not like we have some platonic access to which patient has COVID and which patient doesn't, because there's a blurry borderland of, okay, this patient had COVID 2 weeks ago. They're mostly recovered, but there's still some amount in their system, but they have no symptoms. Is that a COVID patient or not? Or, you know, except there's a whole bunch of border fringe cases to, does someone actually have COVID? But the point that I'm trying to make is healthcare is uniquely difficult, and I might even say bad for AI, because it's often very hard to quantify what's good and what's bad, because health is hard to measure. And like I said, an AI algorithm needs to have a single thing that it's optimizing that is quantifiable and measurable. And it's very easy to quantify how many clicks did this porn video get, or how many erection dysfunction pills did this porn video sell. But it's very hard to quantify how healthy are you, right? And did doing this make you more healthy or not? Is health just trying to maximize your life expectancy? Is health trying to maximize your quality of life? Well, you know, good luck measuring someone's quality of life. And so it's the things that are hard to quantify that AI is least good at. And it's the things that are easy to quantify that'll be the most good at, and including things that are quantifiable at large scales, such as how well did this new child, cartoon get clicked on by kids on YouTube, right? That's easy to quantify, and it's easy to scale that. And so I worry that AI, at least in the beginning, will be better at doing evil than it will be at doing good. Because for some reason, I don't know exactly why, it seems like evil is easier to quantify than good. And that there's something abstract. I would say what the problem that AI has is that we want it to move in the direction of a good telos, but good telos is often not quantifiable. And that you can only describe telos, final cause or form or purpose, with words, but you can't often describe purpose with number. But for whatever reason, our vices, the lower angels of our nature, are more easily subject to quantification, which makes them more easily subject to predatory AI, what have you.
Well, and I would even think even in our Trinitarian and Unitarian stuff, I think sometimes it's more quality versus quantity is a lot of what we're talking about in some of those things, right? Because we can get
Right.
caught up in it. So that would be interesting. So I have one real big question here. So let's just say, can I give you a hypothetical, Sam?
Yeah.
So hypothetically, let's just say there was a Unitarian that worked for a company that has access to lots of people and AI. Could that person could that person undermine and put an
Don't
AI
tempt
out
me,
there
Lance.
to-
Don't
to-
tempt
to-
me.
to totally go out and subvert Trinitarian theology?
Just
Is that what we have to
totally,
be worried about?
totally boost the Unitarian signal on the algorithm.
Could that happen, Sam?
Or just train chat or train the next version of Chat GPT to just always subtly talk people out of Trinitarian belief. Well, if that happens, it wasn't me.
I've got my eye out for it.
And then there is this whole, is AI some sort, or is Chat GPT like conjuring some sort of demon? Because I've been talking about it at a fairly, sort of materialistic level, but I think it's totally fine to talk about it at like the level of principalities and powers and stuff like that. And really, I think what I'm saying is that principalities and powers are at the level of final cause and telos. They're things that exist for reasons, and that sort of, like I've said, ChatGPT right now is sort of purposeless, other than as a curiosity at the moment, but it's starting to figure out some purposes, right? Like maybe it can be a paralegal at a law firm or something like that. Maybe it can help. It can be something like a secretary where you ask it to write an email for you and send it to someone. Maybe it can be something like it automatically writes descriptions of YouTube videos based off of their transcript, or a whole bunch of things along. And there are some uses slowly emerging, and we don't know what those will be. Some of them are probably more useful than others, but it's tugging the potential, the raw potential of intellect into the direction of purposes that are self-sustaining and economically viable. And that it'll really be, once it finally is able to be really integrated into actually useful, viable things, that I think we'll start to see its real potential. But even then, at some level, there's no such thing as an AI business. There's only businesses that do something that they use AI to help them with. Like Amazon isn't an AI business, they're a sell you stuff business. And they use AI to help sell you things and deliver it to your house. Google isn't an AI business, it's a search business it's actually just the phone book, really. That, the companies in the phone book used to be able to have, big pages in them in the phone book. That was like, oh, I'm looking for a plumber. This plumber bought a half-page color ad in the phone book because they paid the phone book company extra money to have that privilege. And that's all that Google is, I search for a Chinese restaurant. Some of the Chinese restaurants have paid Google more than others, so they show up higher on the search. That's really what Google is. And so it uses AI to do that, but it's an ad, like Paul said, Google is an ad business. And go on down the line, all of these businesses have purposes that aren't AI. They have some form of actual business model that they're accomplishing that is something like their purpose, their telos, their final form in the multifaceted human economy. But I don't know. I've said a lot of different things, but
I think that's also like, so that's one direction, but we're the other direction, right? So we're consuming it, and part of it is for us, like. Someone had asked earlier, well, who would ask AI like a moral question? Well, there's a generation of people like a Sam Harris sort of person. Well, if this is the most rational, then I'm going to do it. There, you see the transhumanism. You see this. Like I even fight with my 20-something kids that they're just like, oh, Dad, turning off your location. What? Just give them everything. Like I'm just the old guy who doesn't get it, right? And I think I prepared them for certain things, but I think there are some people that they literally will let this algorithm decide what they do.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's how we approach it as human beings. And then Sherry and Paul Kingsnorth and Nate had a really interesting conversation about
Yeah,
technology and is it
that
and
was
is
a
it
really good.
yeah, and is it like Luke would make the case, and I think it's it like, is technology a net good? I know for the human species, for example, 100 years ago, we were more prepared to handle a catastrophic event because people could feed themselves and would figure out a way to stay alive. Right now, there's some country boys and gals that can do that, but the people in the cities, they're dead. They're dead. They don't know how to feed themselves. Seriously, we have put ourselves, like, some of this stuff is like, when you start asking these questions, is it truly a net good? And then you could even ask yourself another question: is even extending life a net good? We could ask that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like that was like what I was saying. That's why healthcare is hard for AI, because it's hard to know what you're optimizing, because health is hard to quantify. You can sometimes do it like has cancer or doesn't have cancer, and we say not cancer good, cancer bad. But then it's like, okay, well, what if the trade-off is between having cancer or having heart disease? Would you rather have cancer or would you rather have heart disease? So it's like, well, which kind of cancer? Are we talking about one of the mild treatable kinds, or are we talking about like a 2-month terminal kind? You know, so yeah, most things that are good are hard to really quantify, but unfortunately, a lot of the things that are bad are easier to quantify. And I think that's been true of the human economy for a long time. It's just that AI, because it requires quantity, will supercharge some of those bad aspects probably before it supercharges some of the good aspects. But at the end of the day, I still think we'll probably end up finding ways to limit, adapt, constrain, restrict some of these bad things over time. But there will be some pain in the short run that I don't mean to minimize. But at the end of the day, I still feel like evil will always lose to good, because evil at the end of the day is self-defeating and good isn't.
Right. Well, doomsday preaching, no matter what, whether it's religious or not religious, always sells in every generation. But then the problem is when you say the world's going to end in the year 2000 and you miss your mark, like eventually that gets exposed, right? But
yeah,
well,
because it's a short-term high, but a long-term bad bet, right? And so then your bill comes due. And there are a lot of things that are like that. You know, candy is a short-term high, but it's a bad-term long bet to eat too much candy, et cetera, et cetera. But so evil does have a way of eating itself. But unfortunately, it eats a lot of things along the way. Like a virus is that. COVID was that's why I think you can call COVID evil, is because it was taking the health and well-being of society and turning that into making more COVID at the expense of the people it was giving COVID to. But eventually that bill comes due even for COVID.
Yeah, like my seminary professor, and I'm going to change the last word because it makes sense. Sin is fun. It's just that the price tag's a bitch. You know, that nobody says it's not fun in the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are a lot of smarter people to talk about AI. I'm a moron when it comes to this stuff. I just ask stupid, like simple questions that anybody could ask. So I just wanted to pop on, Sam, support you in this. I'll let Jonathan and Matt have a crack at this.
Oh, no.
See you, Lance. Good talking with you. Lance, taller than he looks in person, but not quite as tall as Paul Vanderklay. Almost, though.
He looks pretty tall. I mean, his head was bumping against the ceiling, it looked like.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
that
think
was
he's
the
like
camera
6'3" or
perspective.
6'4".
That was fascinating. Can I just say that, like, a lot of conversations in my day job, which is medical adjacent, has a lot to do with I mean, similar to what you're talking about, Sam. People aren't discussing who are like critically interested in AI. They're not discussing how smart AI is. They're trying to figure out what at least they want to talk about. As much as that, they want to talk about whether or not like how cognitively we're already kind of reshaping our expectations of ourselves because of what we're projecting onto AI, which is which is disconcerting. Like a tool this revolutionary could change how we think about tools and what our expectations of tools are. And that kind of offloading of decision making, just the way we've already offloaded our memories onto the internet, so we don't even try to remember things anymore. We just Google them. Are we going to offload decision making onto AI? Whether it can handle it or not, we're going to do. There's millions of people interested in doing it anyway, and that's kind of, and it's probably going to happen. Whether it can happen, whether it's rational to do that or not, and whether it's even productive, it's still going to happen. Just like the porn stuff you were talking about. So that's kind of the question that I think people need to be wrestling with, which you guys are discussing really well. So,
well, thanks. And even with ChatGPT, it's interesting thinking about what will happen next, because the way that it retrains itself, even ChatGPT is receiving feedback from the world, taking that feedback and retraining itself to try and make it a better version of itself. That's why they keep putting out new versions. And it's interesting thinking about what exactly they're training it to optimize and how that will shape its trajectory. If they're retraining it to be, it's really good if someone keeps engaging with you, right? If you're trying to maximize the number of, say, messages per hour sent to you by a user or something like that, it will probably turn into, it'll probably turn into a phone sex companion bot, right?
Because which is really, that's training the human, right?
Right.
As much as it is the AI.
It's finding the most vulnerable weakness in the human attention that it can keep bringing the human back to, and that's sort of like intimacy sex attention in terms of with chat. But and so that would be a very dangerous thing that they'll have to worry about, and I'm not sure exactly how they'll avoid that to some degree, because they would have to train on something, but I don't know, like how many new chats it starts on different topics might be a better thing to optimize, because that might avoid it turning into a sex companion chatbot and it turning into an answer person. Like, oh man, this person started 4 different topics with me. That was better than yesterday, where my average was 3.5 new topics per user. And so if I'm optimizing myself to be a thing that people come to for multiple topics, that could have a slightly healthier trajectory. But no matter what it is, there is something that it'll have to be optimizing when it retrains itself, and that will have some sort of trajectory. And many of those things will probably go in weird or bad directions, where we'll probably be like, man, remember when ChatGPT was new? It wasn't creepy like this. Why has it gotten so creepy and weird over the past year? And it'll be because of some weird effect that the feedback that it's getting from its users is causing it to shape itself in weird directions.
I thought ChatGPT wasn't being trained on what the user inputs were. It was being trained on some sort of back-end access to like everything that's on the internet or something passively, right?
Yes, but even then, it's being trained on trying to predict what text comes next and trying to probably, there are various constraints on it, like don't give a response that's longer than 500 words. I don't know if that one's true, but various sorts of things like that. But, and so you could just have a model that would never got retrained. You can do that. You can just never retrain and say, here's the model, it's not changing. ChatGPT version 4.0 for forever. But the thing is that they have to worry about competition. Google will do something. China will do something. Everyone else and their mom is going to be starting to try and make the chat bots. And so then they'll face the marketplace competition of trying to be the one that people go to. And then that will inevitably cause them to need to retrain and update and get as much feedback as possible so that they can be winning the race of optimization faster than their competitors. And the way to do that is to get the most engagement, so you get the most feedback, so you can retrain the fastest. And that it's hard for me to imagine that not going in the direction of weird sex bot companion, because that's the way that you actually win the race, is that you just become really fun to talk to. And I don't know. Yeah, my prediction is within a year or two, these things will have gone haywire in some sort of direction, kind of like that, but maybe also in some ways that will genuinely surprise us, and that they will basically have become master exploiters of the human attention in the means that are available to a chatbot.
Yeah, and encouraged to do so every step of the way by the
owners.
Yeah, by the like white pill Sam Harris types, I guess, who want this tool to be more than a tool. So that kind of that like cosmic desire for the AI to take over is actually gonna make it happen. You know.
Someone said something earlier about AlphaGo. I forget who someone said that, but another thing, like AIs really can all they can do is play games, and that's an interesting thing about them, because games are the sorts of things that have instantaneous feedback and have success and failure built into them. Either I won or I lost, or I got this many points or I got this many points, right? And you do things, there are various things that are in your control. There are various rules that are outside of your control. And you're trying to maximize the things in your control to get the best score. And so AI can only play games. That's the only thing that it's capable of doing, really, is things that can be, things that are actual games or things that can be gamified. And then if you're trying to get an AI to do something useful, like, I don't know, do something in healthcare, you need to basically turn that healthcare thing into a game that the AI can play, like give the right medicine to the migraine patient. You know, that's a game, right? We'll call the migraine patient 6 months from now, and you want as many happy migraine patients as you can. So figure out how to give the right migraine medication. So it's a game. But is that game fully encapsulating the reality of the thing that you want it to be doing? And so that's the weird thing about games is it's sort of like Pinocchio, right? You go to that pleasure island and it's full of games, but it gets kind of weird. And at some level, real life isn't a game. But games help you for real life if they're good games.
Yeah, and not all problem solving or information gathering can be gamified. So is this going to narrow the spectrum of how we even, interrogate information? Are we gonna start to think, just like a lot of us maybe start to narrow our spectrum of how we have thoughts based on whether or not they can be, tweeted, for instance, or posted? Are we going to start to, wonder questions based on whether or not AI is going to allow us to ask it?
That would be another very interesting thing for an AI bot to do. And again, I have to believe that people have already tried this one, is make an AI Twitter handle that just tries to maximize Twitter engagement or maximize growth in follower count or maximize the number of people who view your tweets or whatever. And
yeah, it'd probably be blocked. It'd probably be kicked off pretty fast.
And then maybe that's what it needs to learn. It needs to learn how to, and it creates, 100 new accounts a day that each send a couple dozen tweets a day, or maybe it's creating tens of thousands of Twitter accounts a day, right? And constantly, oh, well, that one got kicked off. And so it has to learn how to not get kicked off.
How to be just under the radar. Yeah.
Just under the radar, but try and do the tweets that maximize, your Twitter engagement. And then it's becoming an influencer. And then, it could get paid to buy various, however influencers get paid to influence, it would be an AI Twitter influencer. And that's what it's trying to maximize. That's not that hard to imagine. But again, it needs the scale and quantity and reach of the internet, quantitative feedback, and it needs to do something that's automatable, right? And interacting on the internet is very automatable. Interacting in real life is harder to automate. But someone said that AlphaGo was creative, and I'm not sure if that's the case. The way that they make bots that are really good at Alpha, or that are really good at Go, or really good at chess, or really good at Mario Kart or whatever. Actually, Mario Kart's not a good example, but let's just use chess or Go like a board game, is that you just have it play itself millions or hundreds of millions or even billions of times. And that each time it's playing, it's generating random moves. And in the beginning, it just generates a lot of random moves. But over time, it gets less and less random as it gets a higher and higher level of expertise. And that's not that different than how a beginner human plays chess, right? The first time you play chess, you're like, I don't know what to do. I guess I'll move this piece over here, right? But by the time you've played chess a lot of times, you're like, oh no, now I'm doing this for these sorts of reasons. But the reasons why computers are so much better at chess now than humans is even the most, chess grandmasters only played chess tens of thousands of times, right? How many times can you play chess a day? A couple dozen, even if you're doing it like 12 hours a day. And then you only have so many days. So you can only play chess a few thousand or tens of thousands of times. But a computer can play chess with itself a billion times. And it can have this randomness where it explores all the possible moves that you could possibly think of, where it's played against itself. And then it figures out moves that no human has ever figured out before, because it has more time to figure these things out at a lower cost. And so when AlphaGo is doing some move that even the most professional Go player has never seen, it's like, oh my goodness, that was creative. Well, no. In its billion times that it played Go with itself, it just explored an avenue that no human had ever gone down. And it figured out that there was a productive or strategic avenue that no human had ever realized. And now it's doing that to you. And is that creative or is that... I'm not sure if creative is the right word for what that is, I guess.
Well, yeah. Well, the problem is that there are so many people who want AI to be creative that they might just drown out that technical objection you have, which I think is very valid. They'll just say it's creative because they want it to be creative. Which is
but then one could wonder if our own creativity is actually some sort of similar process to that.
That's the Sam Harrison you talking.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And is our own creativity randomness constrained through expertise, trying something new? And that we have some sort of random thing that's generating possibilities, and some sort of judgment faculty that's like, that's not good, that's not good, that's not good. Oh, that's interesting. That's actually kind of good. Let's do that. And that's something like what creativity actually is.
Yeah, because creativity isn't merely randomness. It isn't just
it's tasteful randomness.
Yeah, it's informed. So,
and in that case, maybe that is what AlphaGo is doing. Oh
gosh, you just convinced us that AI is creative.
Yeah, I either convinced us that AI is not creative or that we are uncreative.
Hi, can I join the AI conversation?
Absolutely. Big questions
take over.
Answered.
I got to leave. I got to go do some stuff, but thanks for letting me pop on. This was fun.
No problem. Talk to you later, Matt.
Yeah, so I've coded an app that can effectively teach anything using a new kind of AI. So I'm in the programming space. I just think AI is just an extension of technology that's going to keep going, and we're inevitably going to make our lives easier. Do you think that's a problem? I think that could be a problem in terms of our function in the world, what to do with ourselves. What's your opinion?
I mean, I do think that AI will have helpful uses, and it already has helpful uses.
Right. Are you worried about AI? I mean, I'm trying to understand where you're going with the conversation of AI.
I guess I have a mix of worry and a mix of optimism. And I think that we could be going through a weird period where AI will be more successful at bad things or evil things or things we don't like faster than it's good at things that we do like or we do want it to do. And that our next 10 years might look something like that, where we're plagued by all of these AI parasites, more or less, that is not pleasant.
All right. What's your, like, as a Muslim, I don't worry too much about things because I think God has got control of everything, and there's only we're in what we call in programming terms a sandbox. There's a limited amount of damage we can do to ourselves. What's your kind of feel about that? Do you believe in God? Do you have any sort of, because I think atheists generally, they worry about everything, even small things, and that's why the Westerners,
because they have no reassurance or final hope. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a Christian, so I do believe that, you know, one day Jesus will come back and that creation will be very good and everything will be as it is. So in terms of my ultimate hope, I'm not worried about evil winning. But I do sometimes, the particular kind of Christian that I am believes in a sort of end times that gets worse before it gets better. And so sometimes I see that AI could sort of feed into that in a certain kind of way. But even if I were to sort of turn off my theology lens, and like, actually, I'm not sure if that's really what I'm doing. Another way that I would express it is that evil in itself can't sustain itself. That's almost like the definition of evil, is that it depends on good things to exist and is almost a parasite. Maybe even a parasite just is the right analogy, that evil is using the energy and the abilities of goodness for its own purposes, but it's destroying goodness, but it depends on goodness. Whereas goodness doesn't depend on evil, goodness is self-sustaining. And so whatever bad things come of AI, it will eventually destroy itself, and it can't defeat good in some ultimate sense.
The reason why, what I'm confused about is that my understanding of our place in this world is we're here to exercise our free will to do good and bad. But if we're overwhelmed by AI and we lose control, then the whole purpose of this world becomes sort of null and void. And I'm thinking God would be quite well aware of our potential to create AI and all that kind of stuff. How does that fit into your worldview? Because I don't wait for an end time for God to intervene. I think God is always present and intervening as necessary, you know, or doesn't let anything out of control. What's your religious worldview on that?
I would agree with that. Yeah, it's not like the clock's just running on its own until Jesus comes back or something like that, and God's not doing anything now. God is always at work in history. God is the ground of all being, and everything exists at every moment because God is sustaining it in being. So it's not like there's ever anything that's ever apart from God in a certain sense that way.
So in that case, there's nothing to worry about if God has got everything in control.
I think in some ultimate sense, there's nothing to worry about. But I would say in the short term, there are still things to worry about. And I think maybe you would probably agree with that too, right? We have to navigate our way through this life. We have free will, and we can use that badly, and we can use that well.
Yeah, I think the way I think my understanding is that we can foresee some of the bad choices we're making so we can learn from them. But if there were some bad choices that we've got no idea how they'll run away from us, then we can't really learn from them. So there's a verse of the Holy Quran that says that, what was it? Something along the lines of, there is no challenge that we are not prepared for. So there's no, so our lives are not really full of coincidences, They are like everything that happens is sort of orchestrated in our lives, and we can prepare for it. But if we've got this idea of there's this great unknown called AI, and anything could happen, and we've got no control of it, we can't learn from it, you just don't know what's going to happen, that doesn't seem to fit into a place where we do have we have a free will that can be exercised in an intelligent way, because whatever choice we make, it has all sorts of random consequences, and I don't believe that. I don't believe there are consequences we've got no idea we can learn from. But if in terms of, like, say, nuclear power, let's say we're worried about nuclear war, how can we overcome that? We can make sure that there's better leaders. How do we overcome that? We have better people, that we select better leaders, etc. There's a whole
but it's still a challenge. Nuclear power is still a challenge that needs to be overcome, and we need to make wise choices, or things could go worse or less worse. And I think AI is like that. I don't think nuclear war has a much better chance of wiping us out than AI. But it could go less well, or it could go more well. And there could be bad consequences and things that come through if we don't navigate it wisely. There's a verse in the Bible, or a verse in the New Testament that's similar. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So there's no challenge that we don't have a good way out of. Right? Which seems similar to the point that you were trying to make.
Yeah. Capacity. Just for the fun of it, just throw in a verse of the Holy Quran. Have you heard much from the Holy Quran before?
I've read it before. I think I've read it through twice. I have my own YouTube channel. I've interviewed a fair number of Muslim theologians on it too.
Okay, yeah. So I think that there's a verse that, or a part of the Holy Quran that repeats, and we burden not any soul beyond its capacity. So it's the idea.
That's a very similar idea. Yeah. Do you believe that Jesus will come back?
That's actually especially an interesting question to ask me, because I believe he's already come back, his second coming.
Interesting. So what kind of Muslim are you?
I'm an Ahmadi Muslim.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You've heard
of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a relative minority among Muslims,
we are
right?
A persecuted minority, yes.
Yeah, well, join the club. I'm a persecuted minority among Christians. So I do not fault people for being minorities within their larger religious tradition.
Yeah. So, what was your interest in asking about the second coming of Jesus?
Well, it was coming up. And so how and when did Jesus come back in your view?
Okay, so he came back metaphorically, and the reason why that had to be the case is because if you look at Jesus' own understanding of how second comings do come, when the Jews asked him about where's Elijah's second coming, he's supposed to to come before Jesus himself, he said that's John the Baptist. So he talked about a metaphorical second coming. So no prophet ever comes back in person, and so of course Jesus claimed to be a Messiah, prophet, and so it makes sense that he would be a metaphorical second coming. And
so what was his metaphorical second coming?
The person was Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. You could if you just search "Promised Messiah" on Google, you get a picture of him. So
that was relatively recent.
Yeah, about 100 years ago. And so he fulfilled many prophecies. So there are some vague prophecies in the Bible that there'll be about of Jesus' second coming, and like the eclipses, the sun and the moon. I can't remember exactly what, but they're very vague. But there were more. We see, as Muslims, we see Christianity, Judaism, all these things are sort of all related, all from God originally, and as time progresses. So, for example, Jesus, or the Bible at least, foretold the coming of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And then if you were to accept Prophet Muhammad, you would have got the more precise versions of the prophecies relating to the second coming of Jesus. And so the very precise prophecy relating to second coming of Jesus in terms of the eclipse, for example, that's kind of more detailed than you get in the Bible, is that in the month of Ramadan, there will be an eclipse of the sun and the moon on certain days, very precise days, and those things happened in case of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. And many other prophecies were fulfilled, that all the Muslims accept that they exist, but they don't like that it was fulfilled in his name.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce the name that you said, but
yeah, maybe I'll put it in the chat. I don't know if I can. Can I do it?
I think you can. Did he, in your view, in your understanding, did he have something like the spirit of Jesus in him, or in what sense? How exactly? What's the connection between him and Jesus?
It's a great question. So, the purpose of saying somebody is a second coming is he's supposed to have certain qualities of Jesus or reflect certain things about him. So we are very peace loving, and I'll tell you something strange. So if I go to debate in somewhere called Speaker's Corner. Do you know it in London?
Yeah, in England. Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
And so if I talk to another Muslim and I say we should love everybody, they immediately know who I am, because it's such an awkward thing for Muslims to say, which is sad. It's a sad reality. And so that reflects Jesus's sort of attitude, where he was like, offer the other cheek, and he offered love rather than hate. And that's a need of our times when we're all so divided. Everybody's hating on everybody else. And the only way to overcome that is with love. So if somebody's angry with me, to bridge that gap, somebody has to show love and say, you know what, I'm not angry with you back. I'll answer your questions politely, etc., etc. So that's one of the defining qualities of Ahmadi Muslims. We've got a famous motto that we're known for all around the world, which is love for all and hatred for none.
Well, that sounds very good to me. It also sounds like Abraham Lincoln. So tell me more. How exactly? What's the connection between? So could you say his name again?
I put it in the. I think it's in the private chat. Is that where did?
In the private chat. Yes, I can see that here. I'll put it in the public chat. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Or maybe I could do it myself, but yeah. I'd just like to thank Secularist Quranism. We were just having a chat on WhatsApp.
Claire,
she told me to click a certain link, so I'm quite all new to this. I never knew you could join somebody else's live stream like this. It's quite a new experience.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, what was your question?
So what exactly, in what sense is Mirza Ahmad Jesus's second coming? So I get what you're saying, how John the Baptist, there's an interesting connection. In what sense was John the Baptist Elijah? And the New Testament is a little bit vague on that question, in all honesty. But I get where you're saying that it's sort of like John the Baptist was in the spirit of Elijah or something like that. And that there were certain signs and connections between John the Baptist and Elijah that made him the forerunner of the Messiah. So what exactly do you mean to connect this historical person with Jesus?
So, other than the idea that he was very peaceful, I'm not too sure about more details about that. It's not something that I took enough interest in. And it might sound like it's the biggest thing there is, but he's also supposed to be not metaphorical, but also the coming of another character in Islam called the Mahdi, which is the guided one. You might have heard of that one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he's fulfilled a number of prophecies all in once. In fact, make it even make the story. Sorry about my 3-year-old.
No problem.
Background. He's also the second coming of the Buddha, the second coming of Krishna. All these people prophesied that they would come in the latter days. And why does it make sense that he is all these people would be represented by one person? Is that God is only one, and He's sent messengers. Oh, it's on video. Just give me a second. I'll probably be leaving in a second. This is a bedroom.
No,
All
that's
the
fine.
kids want to join in a second, but go to sleep. But it makes sense that so in our times, let me just rewind a little bit. Islam is the first international religion. So Jesus said basically you'd only come for the Jews. Buddha was only for people around here, his people local to him. They're all tribal religions. Even Hinduism was originally a tribal religion, or a local religion at least. So now that with the advent of Islam, which is the first religion that was supposed to be for all of humanity, and then with its fall in some ways.
What do you mean by the fall of Islam?
So Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said shortly after his leaving, or his dying, I should say, would become not spiritual and turn into kingship and dictatorships and things like that. And that was prophesied.
Sounds like what some Christians say about what Constantine did to Christianity. But yeah, okay.
Right, okay. And so through that process, eventually the caliphate would end and it would be restarted with a prophet. And that prophet is the second coming of Jesus, who is also the Mahdi as well. And so very interestingly, the moment the original caliphate finished in the Ottoman Empire, the new caliphate under the Ahmadiyya Muslims started that exact same moment. So there are many prophecies that are all fulfilling at the same time.
Is he what's his relative rank to Muhammad in your
He is
theology?
a follower of Prophet Muhammad. So no prophet can come now other than who is under the final teaching of Islam. So yeah, if any prophet comes, he has to be subordinate to Prophet Muhammad. So that's his relationship.
But if he is sort of the metaphorical second coming of Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and all these other things,
Yeah.
that seems like more important than Muhammad.
More important. Okay, so the word Ahmadiyya actually refers to a derivative of Muhammad, but basically means in praise of Muhammad. So this final phase of humanity that I believe we're in the last 7,000 years is going to be the rise of Islam, which we can see already, and it will be a slow rise and all in let's say it's the word honor, or as Islam grows, it will only grow through reverence to Prophet Muhammad. So it's nothing that he's just the way I describe it, it's not so much that he's more important at all than Prophet Muhammad. What he's doing is he's going through the final unifying phase of humanity. So all these people being embodied in his person, or through metaphorically in his person, it's just the uniting of all people, which is what Islam was supposed to do, but it didn't do it in its initial expansion. So there was the initial expansion, which was very quick. Then there was a bit of a loss, and they, let's say, went wrong in many ways, as prophesied as well. And now we're going to the final phase where Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that Islam will rise from the West, as in the second phase of Islam, of its rise, will be from the West. And that's what we're seeing already. We can see it's the fastest growing religion in the West in terms of converts and general growth.
So where is Ahmed now?
He's passed away. And so what happens after a prophet passed away? You have it's the in Islam it's called the caliphs. In previous religions, let's say in the case of Jesus, he had a sort of caliph, which was what was his Jesus's half brother, James. Yeah.
James, yeah.
So he took over in Judea. And things like that. So we're currently on the fifth caliph. So if you just
so is it hereditary or is it appointed? How exactly are caliphs chosen in your tradition?
It's you have a council, a bit like maybe the Pope system. You have a council of people who do the voting.
So like the cardinals pick the next pope after a pope dies, but it's hard work to become a cardinal. So
yeah, basically people from around the world are chosen to be part of this council, and they're not they don't have to be particularly like a cardinal or any official position necessarily. It's just that somebody from each country is chosen ahead of time. So they know as soon as a caliph dies, they have to come with the next like few days, come to London, I think it is, because that's our center at the moment. And then they have an election, and within a few days the next caliph is chosen.
Do the caliphs, what sort of reverence or respect do the caliphs receive in your tradition, and do they have what authority or connection to prophethood do they have?
Did you say could there be prophet?
Or do the caliphs have any sort of what's the nature of the authority of a caliph now?
Right. So what's going to be different? So the nature now is entirely spiritual, and the earlier caliphs, there was a mix between political and spiritual. That's just because it was sort of they had to fight defensive wars, and they ended up having rule over countries at that time, but that wasn't supposed to. The role of a caliph is not supposed to be particularly political. It just happened to be at that time, just because of the nature of they had to fight wars and defend where they are, the lands where they were. So as Islam was growing, there was a lot of jealousy from the Roman and Persian empires, and they tried to attack. And so somebody had to guide the Muslims at that time, and that had to be the caliphate. So they ended up being political leaders, but that wasn't really supposed to be the main thing. So right now, and what will continue is it'll be a completely spiritual leadership, no political.
It's not a political leader, they're a spiritual leader.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who I've talked with a lot who's Ismaili Muslim. And I think similar to your tradition, they're kind of a minority and viewed with somewhat of suspicion from the mainstream Muslim tradition. And they have hereditary imams that have, there seem to basically, as far as I can understand or articulate it, basically possess some spirit of prophethood in them that almost makes them manifestations of the divine in human form. And that interacting with an imam is in some sense interacting with God in and through that imam. And I'm wondering if you have something similar in your tradition with caliphs, not imams, I guess, in your case.
I would say, yes, they are particularly guided. It's not that they cannot be, I'm trying to get rid of the light bulb in behind me, but they cannot be wrong or anything. And even when they give advice, we're given the choice of whether we listen or not, but it's preferred that we listen to keep the unity, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. So if that explains anything. So they're not God, they stay humble, and they say, this is how we're going, this is the direction which the community is going, this is what's going to happen. And if you don't want to do it or something, you can either ignore a particular. There are certain things. There are very few things that you absolutely have to do. It's very lenient, but also, having said that, we're the most organized Muslim community in the world because we're the only ones with a caliphate. All the other Muslims would like one because they're all dispersed and disunited. But what we say is we're the only ones blessed with it. So that's evidence that we're the true or the guided community that Prophet Muhammad said there would be. Because he said in the latter days there'll be 73 sects. All the Muslims know of this great prophecy, and only one of them would be true. And the one that would be true would be the unified community. And that's only through.
So what assures that the caliph is guided? Does he have some sort of spirit of caliphhood on him or something like that? How does exactly that work other than him being a man chosen by a human committee?
So we say that even though the human committee chose them, they were influenced or inspired would be the word. And so usually they get a near unanimous vote, and there's usually lots of stories about. So, for example, a lot of them get a dream that X person is going to be the Khalifa, even though they've never met or heard of them, and they write it down on a letter just to prove their point that they were inspired.
That there was some divine inspiration
Yes,
that is accessible
exactly.
to the council that chooses the person. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so this is creating some spiritual caliphate, I guess is the right word, that is growing in influence and attracting followers. So what does becoming an Ahmadiyya Muslim look like? And what once you're in, what sort of how does that contribute to the spiritual community and the spiritual caliphate?
Right. Okay. So what does it look like becoming an Ahmadi Muslim? So I would describe it from the outside. I would describe it as joining a beehive, because we are kind of the most coordinated, organized Muslim community around the world. So we have systems for getting married, what you might call as arranged marriages. I prefer to call assisted marriages, where in the few streets that I'm on, I know all the Ahmadi Muslims. There's about 50 or 100 of them. I can't remember. It depends if you're counting kids. And we'll be constantly organizing things, eat-togethers. It's a non-stop collaboration. So many things are happening all the time. So that's what it feels like if you're an Ahmadi Muslim. What was the other part of your question?
So, all right. So it sounds like in general, it's relatively similar to joining a lot of religious communities. So I guess my next question is how, I don't know, how should I say this? How is salvation achieved in your tradition, and what's the good thing, what's the bad thing, and how does one avoid it?
Right. Okay. So evidence of if you will have salvation is if you find inner peace in this life, it'll be evidence that you'll find inner peace in the next life. Or if you find effectively paradise in this life, then you'll find it in the next. So there's a verse of the Holy Quran that says, those who fear meeting God, they will see two gardens. And the word for garden is just a metaphor for paradise. So that's the evidence. If you're living well in this life, then you expect to see in the next life. And why that makes sense is because just like, say there's a baby in the womb, and the mother is smoking, and the baby is affected by that bad experience within the womb. When it comes out, it will also have a similar it'll come out unhealthy, as it were. And so if you, in a similar way, if you have a bad experience because you've treated your soul badly and you're not finding inner peace in this life, then you'll not have, when you come out into the next transition of life, because we don't really see the end of this life as really as death, it's just another transition to a higher form. When that higher form comes into existence or frees itself from this human body, it won't come out so well formed, and it'll need to go through a process of healing, which is called hell. And by the way, hell is not a forever process. It's more
Purgatorial,
like rehab,
redemption.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like then everyone will make it through hell and be saved, or
yeah, everybody
be perfectly formed, and that the amount of time that you have to spend in spiritual reformation and suffering is perhaps proportional to your life now. I actually need to run. I've got some work stuff calling my attention.
As well, because my
all
family's
right.
annoyed with me.
All
I
right.
just thought I'd try this out. It was an interesting experience.
No problem. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing about your tradition. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right.
Appreciate your questions. Thanks.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Sorry to leave you back by yourself.
Yeah. Sorry, Eric. Yeah.